right? So why do people take certain actions? What are the conditions of those actions? And then the other thing I think I would say, in slight contradiction to what I just said, so I think that's the longer term, more difficult work. I think we have to look at the fact that recidivism rates are not nearly as high for child sexual abuse as we think that they are. We think they're 90%, and statistics on this are hard, but the recidivism rates for child sexual abuse are closer in a lot of studies between 11 and 14%, and those can be diminished through treatment. So I think we think that this is an intractable problem, and the only solution is to lock people away and throw away the key. And it looks like that's not true. And then further, why don't we build community accountability with children and consider children? I mean, I think we live in a place that really hates children. I think we do a lot that's really damaging to children. Why don't we address that? Right? Why do we allow this cultivation of sexual abuse and assault so often? Why is that a norm in our society? I think we can push against that. But so people who commit sexual offenses, we can talk about those recidivism rates. They're not what we think of in the popular imagination often when they do these surveys about what people think the recidivism rates are and then what they actually are. There are all these like fact myth websites about this. And then treatment seems to be very effective. But I'm more interested actually in taking care of children. Like I think that's where we have to go. Yeah, please.
So earlier you mentioned like instead of driving the sex offenders out or isolating them, you should keep them in. Is that what you're saying in the community?
Yeah.
But one thing is that I think probably re-educating them and making sure that they know that's not the right thing to do would probably be like more effective because how they're re-educated, they'll know how to actually put themselves in the public and would probably not follow that footstep again. Depending how kids as they grow up, the situations they're born in or they're raised in creates that mentality where they actually grow up to become sex offenders or just because they lived in those situations. So by probably trying to figure out by re-educating adults that are sex offenders, probably they'll keep how they would pass that out to the kids and the kids will not be in that situation.
So I think that's a really tempting view, that if we could just take individuals and make them see the error of their ways, they'll be different and they'll pass on something better. And that's the rehabilitation model, right? That we can just rehabilitate individuals and they won't do what they did before.
Rehabilitate themselves, then eventually, as the children's go older, they're gonna follow in that footsteps, and it creates more adults. It's like a never-ending cycle.
And I think the cycle is not from individual to individual. I think the cycle isn't about re-educating one person or rehabilitating one person. I think we have to see what creates the conditions of possibility for desire to work in that way, for action to be taken in that way, for people to be harmed in those ways. And we're not going to achieve that kind of social ontological view, that kind of taking account of social organization by looking at an individual.
Because people that tend to isolate or put shame on sex offenders, it doesn't really decrease that number.
Right.
By
That's right.
them in public or having these.
Well, I think shame might be really useful here, but not shame that ends up in ostracizing people.
Because if you put someone to shame, everybody's gonna know them, they can't really live with themselves. You kind of isolating to the point where they're probably not gonna feel fitting in, and it will probably create more hate, and that probably.
Well, yeah, what we know happens is that when people go to prison, they generally learn more sophisticated crime skills than they had going in. So it's true that isolating a lot of people who have been rejected and eliminated from society together creates a whole counter society within our society that's really good at making sure more people go to prison. Yeah. Yeah, please.
So if we keep the sex offenders within the community, just think that the whole community is going to go against that person. You think it's going to make him or her more vulnerable to be harmed by them?
Well, this is a great question. Two things. We mostly keep sex offenders in our communities. So most sex offenders don't get recognized as sex offenders. They don't get accused. They don't go through a legal proceeding. So mostly what we're doing right now is keeping sex offenders in our communities. We're just not doing anything about them being in our communities right now. When we do something about them in our communities, we involve ourselves in a process that doesn't redress the harm to the people they've harmed, that doesn't redress why they're doing the things that they're doing, that doesn't redress the harm that they've had visited upon them. And we perpetuate the conditions that allow sex offenses to mostly go unaddressed in our communities. So I think you're right to worry about people getting labeled as sex offenders. Because when we label people as sex offenders, and that's that Human Rights Watch report that I read, when we do that, we do increase the vulnerability of those people. And that's our current response. When people are litigated, when people do go through a criminal justice proceeding on this, they get labeled as sex offenders, they get ostracized and usually harmed in jail or in prison. And then they're on a sex offender registry out in public, and that makes them targets of harm outside of prison. So what we're doing right now is labeling people with no effect. It's just perpetuating the system we're in. We're making those people more vulnerable without making children safer. So we need a way of acknowledging that these harms are happening in our community without making people who've committed harms monsters. I see some new hands.
Time for one more.
Oh gosh, I hate fielding my own questions. Who's got a burning desire? Yeah?
Well, I don't know if it's burning, but
Okay, maybe a mild desire.
on the Generation 5,
Yeah,
it's on having the victim be a part of the
yeah,
pretty much the process of
yeah.
the community.
So they, in most community accountability organizations, have the principle that victims or survivors can determine their own rate of involvement. And so they can step in and out of the process, but the community keeps a community accountability process going. So it's not on the victim or the survivor to keep that process going. There's a whole community around what's happened and working out. So if somebody, one example that this Communities Against Rape and Abuse gives of work they did, there was somebody who was committing sexual assault or sexual harassment at a church. And so what they said and the people who had experienced this, not as interested in being involved in the process, but they had a check-in. That person could attend the church, but only if they checked in with certain people and stayed with certain people during the service. They could attend church functions, but only if they checked in with certain people and stayed with certain people. So there a victim or survivor may have different degrees of wanting to be involved in the process at different points, and that has to be honored in a community accountability process. That desire has to be, that self-determination has to be honored, and it's something that our current system doesn't do. Many, many survivors of sexual abuse and assault call the criminal justice system the second assault. They think of the process as another violation because there's no self-determination in the process.